Good day. I'm Martin Gago with Market Radius Research. It's Tuesday, February the 22nd. We've got CEO Andrew Davidson and Dean Nawata, VP Biz Dev of Royal Helium. Royal Helium is exploring for helium in Saskatchewan. Helium is a critical element for a modern economy and has constrained supply, as well as an oligopolistic industry structure, creating unique opportunities and challenges. I'm meeting with Royal Helium because I've been following and been interested in the company and the industry for many years. There's been a reshuffling of people at the firm over the last few years, and now there are several people I know and respect that are involved with the story. The helium space is very interesting. While it's a multi-billion-dollar market, it is still a very niche market, and with just a few dominant players involved. This often allows for disruption and opportunities for small, nimble players. I'm not very knowledgeable about helium or the oil and gas sector, as exploring for helium is very similar to hydrocarbon exploration. So I'm trying not to get over my ski tips too much, and I'm looking forward to asking some basic questions on the industry and learning as much as possible. I'm hoping this will be a very informative session where we all learn a lot. Please remember, this is neither a recommendation nor an investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Andrew, Dean, thank you very much for joining us today. And let's hear about Royal Helium.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks very much, Martin. I just wanted to kind of highlight a couple of main key points before Andrew kind of takes you through the presentation and you ask your questions. Number one is everything that we're talking about in Saskatchewan. Please remember that Saskatchewan is still the only place on the planet that produces what's called primary helium. So that is helium not associated with hydrocarbons or natural gas. Obviously, it has a lot of implications on carbon footprint, et cetera, as well as costs, which Andy will take you through. Number two is to keep in the back of your mind that what we've encountered last year is we made a new discovery, and the importance of that is we are still, as our original plan, looking at producing what's called conventional helium. So helium just above the Precambrian basement in what we like to call little traps or pimples above the basement rock there. But our new discovery is an unconventional zone, easily 10 times thicker in pay and maybe even 20 or 30 times in area. So one of our contractors was quoted in our news release mentioning an analogy to the Montney natural gas play in Alberta. So this is quite a different play and very exciting for us. So the story really now is twofold: conventional play and unconventional Nazare. So there you go. I'll flip around on the slides for you, Andy. So please go ahead.
Great. Thanks, Dean, and thanks, Martin. I appreciate the platform today. Happy to talk about helium, of course. Little quick background on the company itself. Royal started back in 2016, and I believe the former management group met with Martin at some point back in those days. Martin mentioned a shuffle of management. That happened in early 2019 with myself and the team that you see on screen now getting shuffled in and shuffling out the prior team. And once that happened, the company really took off in terms of activity, and it's really borne fruit, frankly, in the market based on what we've accomplished so far. The team is relatively small. It consists of myself as the president and CEO. Our CFO is Jeff Shepard. Jeff and I have worked together for the better part of 12 to 15 years now. Dean Nawata, who you just heard from, he was the VP of Biz Dev. He's been involved with the junior markets forever. Stephen Alabura is our VP of Exploration. He is a legend in Saskatchewan when it comes to natural resource development, principally focused on oil and gas and potash. Some of his bigger deals have involved the sale of Anglo Potash to BHP Billiton and what is now their Jansen project. Shane Nigham's our manager of well operations. He's a young geologist who has grown up in the oil patch and knows just about everyone there is to know there. He's in charge of executing our day-to-day activities. Dr. Rob Stewart, professor of geophysics at the University of Houston. He looks after and comments on all of our geophysical campaigns, which is very relevant given the news we made last week. And last but certainly not least is Mr. John Stiles, who is our lead engineering consultant, and he's the one who has made the comparison to the Montney formation in northwestern Alberta. Sorry, long-standing, very, very highly regarded petroleum engineer in Saskatchewan. We've got a number of consultants we work with. They're all listed here. They all are involved in their own specific aspect of it, whether it be Panther Drilling with the actual drilling of the wells, Artisan Consulting, who manages the drill programs, through Independent Well Servicing, IWS, who does all of our service rig work, and RPS Energy, which is our principal geophysical consultant. They do all our seismic programs.
Andy,
Yes.
Just to sort of state the obvious on that, all of your suppliers, your engineers, they're oil and gas specialists, and instead of hydrocarbons, they're looking for helium. And
exactly right.
It's buried deep in the earth, just like hydrocarbons, and you're trying to suck it out with big straws.
You got it. So on the screen now, you'll see the picture. That is the drilling rig that we use to drill our wells. That's Panther Drilling's rig number 4. That same rig will go and drill wells for Crescent Point or for anyone when they're done. It's a standard oil and gas drill rig drilling conventional vertical wells. So same exact technology as in the oil and gas space, which is a big benefit to us where we are, because we're down in southern Saskatchewan, which has an enormous and well-defined oil field. So all of these services they exist locally, which is a great.
And you're also doing it in a place where there's some of the world's best engineers and technicians and everyone doing it. So this is, I don't know where a non-oil and gas area is, but you've got huge human resources to lever.
Yeah, everyone that we need is within a 2-hour drive away at worst. We're located about a half hour south. Our primary field, the Climax field, is located about a half hour south of a town called Shaunavon, which is really the headquarters for the Crescent Point Shaunavon Uplift natural gas place, and light oil place. So it's every service we need is located right there. The communities are unbelievably supportive of what we're doing, as are the governments. We'll get into that a little later on, but what you see on screen is a map of our holdings. Our holdings are in blue. It is all centered around southern Saskatchewan, split virtually evenly between the southwest and the southeast. The southeast is more well known for oil and gas development. This is the heart of the Bakken field in Canada, the Weyburn Estevan area of the world. Not so much helium exploration over there. We're in fact the first people to drill purpose-drilled helium wells over in that part of the province at our Ogama site. But where we've started and where we continue to focus more than anywhere else is the Climax helium field, which Dean is highlighting there with his cursor. That's a little over 50,000 hectares in size, that one project area, where we've now got 4 wells into it. We started there for a couple of reasons. One, there was some seismic there that we acquired. We're able to see the downhole structures to some extent, and that's what we use to target our wells. And we drilled our first 3 starting January 6th of 2021. We've now drilled 4 there. And we've drilled down looking for conventional helium reservoirs. And as Dean mentioned, these are sort of small traps subsurface that accumulate gas that leaks up from the basement. And just so we all know how helium is created, it's actually created from the natural decay of uranium and thorium. That's how helium is created as a gas. And it's one of the reasons why Saskatchewan makes the most sense to look for it, given we have some of the highest uranium concentrations in the world. So we've got that going for us, and we've got well-defined traps in the subsurface area that can trap that gas. Without those traps, that helium will simply move up through the geological column and then out of the ground and then literally into outer space. It just floats away. Which is why you don't see any helium development up in the Athabasca Basin, for example, because there's no traps there.
And helium is atomic number 2 on the periodic table, so tiny atoms that can kind of leak through stuff. So is it actual sort of big caves that it goes in, or is it like a permeable kind of looser amalgamation of rock that it sort of gets stuck in?
It gets stuck in. The answer is yes and yes. The best way to picture it is, the easiest way to describe it is take a bowl and turn it upside down.
Yeah.
And the bowl is now what we would call your cap rock. That would be your seal, impenetrable rock. So gas comes up underneath it and gets trapped on the underside of that bowl.
Yeah.
And we drill through the top of it and produce gas from it.
Or because it's a byproduct of uranium decaying, do you have any radioactive like concerns? Like I can't remember some of the radioactive gases that leak up, or any concerns like that?
No, we don't have any issues there. By the time it gets to this point, I mean, it's so far above the uranium levels. I mean, it is certainly high in like uranium and thorium are quite high on our core analysis, but not to the point where they're radioactive.
Okay.
Yeah. So good, great question though. So generally we were drilling for these more conventional traps, which are the shallower type accumulations of helium and nitrogen. That's the carrier of helium gas in Saskatchewan is principally nitrogen. And we had a great degree of success in doing that. We drilled Climax 1, 2, and 3 and encountered economic helium grades in all 3 wells through those conventional zones. But then in Climax 3, we drilled into this substructure, which was right at the basement, right where our well was supposed to stop in terms of how deep we were going. But we were still, you gauge how deep your well is obviously by measuring the depth, but also by the rate of penetration of the drill bit. Once you get into the true Precambrian basement, that drill bit will slow right down because it just has trouble breaking that rock apart. And so we got down into what was mapped as Precambrian basement and found that it wasn't. And so we kept drilling, and we drilled an extra 100 meters. And that has become the Nazare zone, which is as much as over 100 meters thick in certain places, and some of the highest helium tests that we've recorded to date come out of that zone. So that was the major discovery that we announced last spring, summer. And the implications of it are quite large. One, because of the size, as Dean mentioned, it's 10 times the size of most conventional helium reservoirs, globally speaking. The aerial extent is another huge differentiator. We've got it mapped now over 30 square miles in terms of where this zone goes, and it's limited in size only by our seismic coverage. Where we don't have seismic coverage, we can't map it. So it's one of the reasons that we're completing the seismic program we announced last week, is to really get a better idea of the scale.
And just to be clear, you you get your targets from like geological mapping as well as traditional seismic,
yep.
3D seismic and that, and you say, hey, there's some different reflective whatever that bounces off the thing. This looks like there is a good target, but you got to drill in there to find out if there really is something.
Yeah, that's right. So we looked through a combination of basically aeromagnetics, which is measuring sort of basement uplift by the reactive nature of the waves we put down there, combining that with seismic, looking for areas where there's been basement movement, and that basement movement is overlain by a trapping structure. So those two things, and when those two are present, you have a prospective helium zone. And again, we picked our areas of land based on historic gas tests, which means gas tests that have been completed over the previous 60 years from oil and gas drilling, where just people stepping out and drilling oil and gas wells and testing what comes out. We picked up any ground that we could find that had elevated levels of helium. So that's how we ended up with our 1 million acres. So we knew that there was helium in the system. We knew that there was a basement uplift event, which would allow helium to be released from that Precambrian basement. And we knew there was a trap there that would hold it in place.
So this has been drilled previously by like oil and gas guys, and they detected some helium in the thing. They didn't care about it at the time. You took that data from the public records or whatever and said, hey, here's some good targets.
Yeah, we did that. That was pretty well the exploration plan when it came to securing our land base.
Okay.
Let's find areas where we know there has been helium in the past.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, when helium has been found, it's been found people drilling natural gas wells and trying to light the flare stack on fire to confirm that it would burn.
Yeah.
Non-flammable gas is generally non-value gas. And so when there was non-flammable gas, they would just move on. Non-flammable non-renewable gas is exactly what we're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah, so there were no direct drills on our specific land package, but there was in the area. So we looked at those historic tests, and then we found ground that had good seismic coverage on it, and went from there. So after we drilled those first three and discovered that Nazare zone, we came back in the late summer and drilled our Climax number 4 well. This was a well drilled specifically to recover the drill core from this Nazare formation. So drill core, for anyone who doesn't know, is we're literally taking up a sample of the rock that exists 2,800 meters below surface. And we brought that into the lab, and we spent the better part of a month and a half analyzing that with an army of geologists and geophysicists and engineers to determine exactly what we had there. And universally came back as we have one of the largest helium finds known in North America. So now becomes the tricky part of unlocking it and getting it to produce, but that's what we're on to now. So it's a pretty exciting find, and it's on top of the conventional zones that we drilled through on the way to it. So really it's become a company with two project areas within the same project. They represent, or they both bring different economics to them. The deeper wells into the Nazare are going to be more expensive, but they're also going to be more prolific. The shallower wells are going to be faster and cheaper.
With your drilling that you do, you talk about conventional. Does that have an unconventional? Is that at all analogous to hydrocarbon, unconventional, conventional, where you do like horizontal drilling and fracking and all that stuff?
Exactly the same. Yeah. So conventional, when we talk about conventional, we're talking about straight vertical, unstimulated wells.
Yeah.
When we talk unconventional, now we're into wells that require frac or stimulation of some sort, and potentially horizontal as well. So,
okay.
Yeah.
But you don't have a drill plan yet, so to speak. You're still sort of assessing that part of it out, exactly how you're going to tackle this.
Yeah, correct. For the Nazare zone, we are still working on that engineered drill plan, and the whole purpose of that is simply to find the best and most economical way to drain this helium reservoir, right?
Yeah.
So, and if that means drilling, 2 wells that are more expensive versus 20 verticals, then so be it. So it's really a matter of marrying the engineering with the economics and determine the right way to drain a section.
Because it's helium, are there certain elements you have to be more careful of? Let's say if you go in the wrong area, you break the seal and all the helium escapes, or anything like that, or you're just it doesn't escape fast enough to make it sort of material to your thing, or
well, theoretically yes, but in practice, whenever you're drilling a well, that well is cemented to the surrounding rock, so you're creating a brief moment in time piercing of that pool and then quickly cementing it off again. So
okay.
There's no material leakage as a result.
Okay.
Just Martin, just to sort of clarify between conventional and unconventional that we even have here, we like to describe it as the conventional wells are little pimples that are overlying the Nazare zone, and conventional well here, as well as in the United States and elsewhere in Canada, they can range in size sort of a square mile and 5 to 10 meters thickness in pay, whereas Nazare is like 30 sections or 30 square miles and 100 meters in thickness. So that is a lot of where the unconventional completions techniques will take place because of the thickness and the size and the type of rock it's in. Therefore, multi-leg horizontal or multi-stage frac, that type of situation is likely, which we'll find out once we get the 3D seismic completed here, and some other work will really make a difference.
Yeah.
When the gas comes up, and I think you're going to get into this, so maybe I'm getting ahead of ourselves here. Like there's a lot of nitrogen in it. You don't have the hydrocarbons because of, as we discussed, are the out of the unconventional, the Nazare, is that higher concentrations of helium or lower concentrations, or is it kind of the similar when it comes up?
So far, it's been higher.
Okay.
Higher concentrations, and which does make some sense because it's closer to the source, right?
Yeah.
So everything above it is going to have filtered through this zone and out from somewhere.
Okay.
So it's a more concentrated area for sure.
And I would think that then makes the end processing a little bit cheaper as you've got less byproduct to get rid of in its higher concentrations.
Well, that's going to be virtually the same.
Okay.
The processing side, because you are going to be processing out the same gases to the extent on a per MCF basis. I suppose it's probably a bit cheaper because there is marginally more helium in the system, less of the byproduct. So,
cool. Thanks.
Yeah, let's move ahead, Dean.
Okay. Do you want to mention that our 3D is extending this whole project?
Yeah, well, that sort of gets into what I was mentioning before. We're really pushing the boundaries of the 30 square miles that we've mapped so far. The 3D seismic is pushing that limits further. We'll continue to define how far northeast, west, and south this zone goes. And this is all occurring while we're commencing our reservoir modeling studies that we also announced last week, which gets to your point, Martin, as to how we're best going to develop this lower play. And these are some of the quotes that John Stiles, our chief engineering consultant, put in. This is going to be available on our website for anyone who wants to read them in detail. But the comparison to the Montney is a very significant comparison for anyone who knows oil and gas. It's now, I believe, the second largest developed natural gas field in the world. Very similar development pathway. It was drilled into its tight rock. It required some unconventional drilling and completion. Once that was solved, it became one of the most prolific plays in the world. And that's what it looks like we're into. We won't know for sure until we're done, of course, but all the track marks are there for it. And for us, we have the added benefit of having the conventional helium as well. So we can be producing and generating cash flow from helium production while we're developing the deeper play. So, yeah.
And just to clarify, where we're at is, as we mentioned in our last news release, and John Stiles' quotations here, is we're in the midst of doing a simulation for multi-stage hydraulic frac here, potentially multi-leg as well. So that's kind of where we're at with that, in combination with, as we mentioned, conducting 3D seismic over the area that we know and extending it to the north as well. So those two things kind of play together. The simulation will also depend somewhat, or the 3D will help the simulation engineering as it goes forward here in the near future.
Okay. Yeah, let's jump ahead again, Dean. So now we're into a separate land package that we have over here near Climax. And again, Climax, Dean can point to right now. We're moving over to a field called Val Marie, which is about 60 kilometers to the southeast, right along the US border. And Val Marie was one of the first land packages that we acquired some 5 years ago now. And it's centered on something called the Bedoin Dome, which is an event that is theorized to have caused the helium emplacement in this entire region, and extending further south into Montana, where there is also helium production. So we're doing a 2D seismic program over this region, which is what you see there. Those blue lines are the actual seismic lines that'll be shot in the coming weeks here. That program will be done by March 15th. And we're going to follow that up with our first conventional helium well in Val Marie. And what excites us so much about it is the size of the structure, which is highlighted in that colorful map you see there. This is highlighting an uplift area, so it's a very, very significant in terms of size, the Val Marie uplift. And It's been, we've had a number of people come to us and try to buy this property off of us before we did anything with it. It's kind of the jewel in our crown, and we put it down the priority list from Climax for a couple of reasons. One, it's an environmentally sensitive area, which we had to understand. We're in and around national and provincial park. Grasslands National Park is just to the northeast. The Frenchman River Valley runs right through the middle of our property area. You'll note on the map there where there's the gap in between our holdings. That's the Frenchman River Valley. There will be no development going through there. So we found ways to access this land in a very non-intrusive way, so as to not damage the sensitive areas. So what we're doing is utilizing old drill pads from Vermilion Energy, who has some natural gas wells in this area, and we're going to be drilling off of those here in the spring. So we're exceptionally excited to drill in this area because of the size of the structure we're drilling into, and some of our consultants have made some very anecdotal comments saying every time they've drilled into a structure of this size, they've been pleasantly surprised. So we're hoping that streak continues clearly. And when you look at that anomaly that we have there, our land holdings are highlighted, or they're shaded, I suppose, in there, and it gives a really good indication of the sheer scale of this feature. And it extends up into the Climax area. You can see on sort of the northwest corner of the Bowden Dome. That's into the Climax land package. So again,
it's hard to see, but these orange blocks here,
yeah,
on the map, they're kind of gray here.
Yeah.
On the Bowden Dome.
Yeah.
Can you give us a bit of a sense of scale on like each quadrant, or that your blue map there? How many kilometers across is that, or just ballpark?
Oh boy. Well, every one of those squares is a square mile.
Okay.
Yeah, these little squares.
Yeah.
That's one section, so that's 1 square mile.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Like on here, you see the squares are smaller, but that would be this square, for example.
Okay.
It's quite extensive.
Is this square right here?
Okay. So that the one on the bottom right is, can you point to where that area would be on the blue section?
So
On
let's say
blue map?
let's say this block right here.
Yeah.
This square, that is that square block.
That's what I thought. Okay.
You see, it's gray. It's a little hard to see, but that's exactly.
And then point to that dot on the upper map. That one would be right there.
Yeah.
That's that block right there, which is that block right there.
Yeah.
Which is that block right there. You can sort of see where this block and this block touch the corners.
Yeah.
It's that block and that block.
Yeah.
And that block and that block.
And sir, why does it call Montana USA? Because Montana is just south across the border there.
Yeah, the bottom line on these maps is the U.S. border.
This is the U.S. border right here.
Gotcha.
And so there is helium production coming off of the Bowden Dome on the Montana side.
Okay. Is there any helium production right now coming off the Canadian side?
No, we hold these leases or these permits. So
okay.
First.
Yeah, and we've held them for 5 years, I think, at least. Yeah.
5 years.
Okay.
And so you look around, everything sort of in between or to the east of our land holdings there at the bottom, Dean, the one that is right on the border. Everything in between those two is unavailable land. If we don't have it, you can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not available for permits. So
yeah. This doesn't show them all, but it's parkland.
Yeah.
The green here is parkland.
You're using Vermilion's old drill pads. When they were drilling on this land for oil or natural gas, for that, were they going deeper or shallower than what you're going?
Much shallower.
They're going shallower.
Yeah, much shallower. So they're
okay.
The traditional sort of oil and gas traps in this area are at about around 1,200 meters down. We're drilling down to 2,800 plus.
Okay.
So similar to this picture here, all the conventional oil and gas formations that you know of are in this region up here.
Gotcha.
Where we're going is down here.
Yeah.
Which is incidentally why some natural gas wells have helium in it, If the helium is formed here in the Precambrian basement, as you mentioned, Martin, helium is the only element on the periodic table that doesn't react with or combine with any other element on the periodic table, and it's small. So if it's formed down here, in certain places, it may escape, come up, and then get trapped in an oil and gas trap.
Yeah.
And the cost to drill 1,600 meters, is that, I don't know, how much does a drill a whole exploration hole here cost, ballpark?
$1.5 million Canadian.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's drilled and completed just to drill it alone. So what would be called a dry hole cost would be about 1.2 million.
Gotcha. And then another few $100,000 to complete it.
Yeah, you got it. You got
Gotcha.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right, Dean, let's move ahead. So we're doing seismic at Val Marie. We'll be drilling Val Marie as soon as breakup is over. And breakup is a period of time where the frost is coming out of the roads in Saskatchewan and they have road bans on. You can't operate heavy equipment. So it's, a 2 to 4 week period in the spring, generally in March. So we'll be shut down at that point, and then we'll be drilling in April, May. Over at Ogama, this is our first project area in the southeast. We drilled 2 wells here in the fall. You can see them there, Ogama 1, Ogama 2. These are the first purpose drilled helium wells in the southeastern portion of Saskatchewan. For what it's worth, these have the highest concentrations ever recorded in Saskatchewan for helium is in the southeast. You can see where they are right there. So in that range is about the 2.5%, Martin. 2.5% helium would be overwhelmingly the largest helium test seen in Saskatchewan.
And those are of concentrations. What, and is the rest nitrogen, or what are
Yes.
are the rest of the gases consist of?
The rest is principally nitrogen, some argon. Interestingly, we found hydrogen over at Climax. There could be some methane, but it'll be in material amounts, and some CO2 as well, potentially. That would be the gas mix.
And what makes a viable, like how low a concentration, and how much of it that can it get until it loses its economic viability?
Generally, the economic cutoff is seen at 0.3%.
Okay.
0.3% helium. So we're well above that everywhere we've tested. I think some of our lowest tests are double that.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're in good shape. So the Ogama field is a standalone project. We are not done completing over there yet. We're in the process of getting some additional rights to some new zones in these wells, which we'll be testing again into the spring, summer months. So both successful wells, all tested in the 0.7, 0.8% helium range. So we're pretty ecstatic with what we've got there. And it was big news for the province of Saskatchewan because we keep pushing the helium fairway further and further to the east. So really sort of growing the potential helium fairway essentially on our own because nobody else is doing it. It's one of the reasons why we've had great support from the province. And this is a very important slide, especially when compared to other regions in North America, specifically some of the southern US states, where the government is firmly behind everything we do, so much so that they've actually built a helium incentive program where they provide actual financial incentives for the activities that we're doing, whether it be exploration or infrastructure builds or what have you. In fact, we made our first submission into that program a month ago and are awaiting some of that funding to come back to us. And in the top left corner, that's Minister Bronwyn Eyre. She's the Minister of Natural Resources in Saskatchewan. This is the announcement of the Helium Action Plan. They invited Royal down to that announcement. Had a nice speaking part there. The entire region is viewing helium as essentially a green transition for oil and gas, where all the people with the same skill set, the same equipment and everything can do a little shift from hydrocarbon into non-hydrocarbon based gas production. So as the world continues to decarbonize, the the demand for helium will continue to rise, and Saskatchewan is poised to be one of the largest jurisdictions in the world. In fact, the province announced it intends to account for 10% of global helium supply by the year 2030. And right now it's about 1%, and we're 8 years away. So there's a lot of work to do, and they're making sure it happens by providing the incentive programs like they have. So it's
and with the analogy with the oil and gas sector, Saskatchewan's obviously got a very substantial hydrocarbon industry, and so many of the same rules, regulations, regulatory structure just easily overlays onto helium. So you're not dealing with a regulatory environment that doesn't know what they're doing.
No, not at all. I mean, helium in Saskatchewan is separate from the Hydrocarbon Act.
Okay.
But most of the procedures are the same. So,
yeah.
Like for example, for us, when we want to go drill a standard well, it's a 2 to 3 week process to submit the application to receiving the permit. And when we get those permits in Saskatchewan, you are licensed to drill it and to produce it. So there's no separate regulatory scheme. Once you have that approval, you're good to go. The only time it drags on is if you're into an area where there may be some environmentally sensitive ground, like at Val-Marie, for example, or a couple areas up by Bengoff. But they are terrific to work with in areas where there's regulations that don't translate well from oil and gas to helium. They will work with us to ensure that the right interpretation is made to allow us to develop as quickly as possible. They're actively removing hurdles as opposed to imposing new ones.
All right.
Hey, Andy, maybe can you clarify sort of the three major incentive programs, like how big they are really, the capital side, the exploration side, and actually as well, the difference between the provinces and the United States, for oil and gas royalties versus ours.
Very, very important points, Dean. Thanks for bringing me back there. So on the incentive program, I'll make it relatively quick. There are essentially 3 phases to it. There's an exploration incentive, a development incentive, and an infrastructure incentive. So on the exploration side, that's where we've applied for. It's basically all of the work we've done developing Climax 3 and 4 for the Nazare zone. In there, it's simply a return of capital equal to about 25% of what we've expended there. So for us,
so they give you spend $1 million, and they'll get, and after you've spent it, they'll give you 250 grand back.
If this, in qualified expenditures, absolutely they will. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. On the development
royalty
side, it comes in terms of production credits, where you can basically get a royalty credit that you can either use yourself or you can sell to oil and gas producers. It's a very valuable program. The credits sell at about 95 cents on the dollar, and the province actually can facilitate the sale of those. So that's a very useful thing. On to the infrastructure part, this is by far the largest component. And this is for building infrastructure as small as a mobile helium separator and as large as a helium liquefier. And the cap on that program for any one project is 75 million in terms of grants or credits available. So just enormously large program designed to take companies like ours from exploration stage into refined added value helium products. So
Sorry, I'm just realizing on the step back on the royalties, you said you get royalty credits that you can sell. Sorry, I just don't understand that. What does that mean?
So just as an example, if the royalty credit, let's just say for round numbers, it's 10%. So if I spend $100, I get a $10 royalty credit, which would offset my royalty cost on the production scenario.
Okay.
You understand that so far?
Okay.
So, yeah. And so that becomes a saleable credit where I can sell that $10 to an oil and gas company.
Okay.
For 95 cents on the dollar. They take the deduction, I get paid in cash.
Why wouldn't you just take the deduction yourself?
Well, you certainly can.
Okay.
But initially, anyway, we're going to have so much in terms of built up tax pool from exploring that we don't need the credit right away.
Gotcha. Okay. Oh, that's cool. All right.
So,
And And then on this side, can you walk us through, okay, the gas comes out, you put it into tanks. It has to be cleaned up. You just want pure, almost pure helium. And I'm guessing maybe you get it to 90% helium on the first pass, you send it down the supply chain, and then they may be purified a bit more to get it medical grade or something. And then you also need to liquefy it or condense it so it's cheaper transportation. North American Helium is a big player in Saskatchewan. I guess they're a service provider of that. Can you just walk us through that whole supply chain?
Sure. North American Helium is a company just like ours, but they're a ways further in their development path. So Dean, if you could go back to there. Yeah, let's start here. So that image you see on the top, that is the purification facility of North American Helium. And so how it works is you produce the raw gas from the well.
Sorry.
It runs into a facility like this, where again, it separates off the nitrogen, any methane, argon, nitrogen, CO2 is stripped out, and you are left with an upgraded helium product. Generally in the range of 95% pure helium to 99.999. That would be the highest grade. It's called 5.9s. And that's what would be the output of a facility like this. And that's what gets sold. And it either gets sold to a liquefier who will then take that gas, turn it into liquid and resell it on their own, or you just transport it to a liquefier and they'll toll process it for you into a liquid, and then you sell the liquids. Liquids have a far higher value in terms of selling price than gas does, but it's pretty capital intensive to build a liquefier. So that's why a lot of producers, including North American Helium, will produce to that 95% grade and then take it down to a liquefier.
So they're not liquefying themselves, they're doing that. And are the liquefiers the Air Liquides, the Lindy's and those guys?
Principally, I mean, they've got them for sure, but the plant you see from North American here, this is an Air Liquide facility, in that Air Liquide designed and helped build it.
Okay.
The bottom image here, this is a liquefaction plant in Colorado. So
okay.
That's what a liquefier looks like, and it's got functionally the same front end, where it will upgrade helium to a certain level and then run it through a liquefaction unit.
Okay, gotcha.
So that North American Helium plant is somewhere over here, and this is the U.S. border right here.
Yeah.
So they refine the helium that they're gathering in this area here, and it's trucked across the border over to Colorado to be liquefied.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So all of their production from their plant crosses the border for liquefaction.
Yeah.
And I presume everything's trucked. There are no helium pipelines or anything like that?
Right. That's right. Helium only goes in pipelines when you're trying to detect leaks. That's
okay. Because it's such a small molecule, they'll find out if it escapes.
Absolutely.
It escapes.
Yeah. So yes, your point is valid. It gets put into tubes, what are called cigar tubes in the helium business, just compressed, pressurized helium canisters.
Yeah.
And then driven on the back of a truck down to a liquefier. And the reason that people liquefy helium, aside from the fact that some uses need liquid, is the ability to store it longer. As a gas, helium will eventually escape no matter what compressor or what vessel it's in. As a gas, it is far more stable, or as a liquid, it is far more stable, sorry. So, as a liquid, it can travel around the world. As a gas, it simply cannot.
Gotcha. And it's way more compact as well. So just it. And can you talk about, like, how do you market it? There's no, I don't believe there are any futures in helium. It's a very sort of contained market. It's on contract and it's sort of contained by like 5 players in the world, probably, I don't know, a vast majority of the market. Do you sell it to them, or are you trying to bypass them at all and sell it to MRI manufacturers directly, or how are you doing that?
Yeah. You mentioned in your preamble the oligopoly that exists in this industry, and it's very much the case. Certainly historically, that companies like Air Liquide, Praxair, Linde, Air Products dominate the helium market, but only on the wholesale side. They don't actually produce helium from any. They don't have any production wells.
Yeah.
purely wholesalers. So they'll buy from the producers and resell it. There has been sort of a groundswell of companies like ours who are sourcing refining capability outside of those major players and looking to contract specifically with end users. It's a relatively new growing phenomenon that's happening, but it's done to allow more flexibility principally. When dealing with the large companies, those are tough contract negotiations. And you'd asked about how does it sell? All helium sells on, well, virtually all sells on long-term contract pricing. So we will negotiate with the buyer a contract price that has, a lifespan of 8 to 10 years for a set volume of helium. That doesn't provide a lot of flexibility for the producer. It provides some certainty for sure, but not a lot of flexibility. So some of the smaller producers or smaller buyers are entering into shorter term contracts that have more flexibility. And that's what we're looking at to a great degree, is these shorter term initial contracts. It allows for greater price appreciation. And of course, there is downside risk that the price falls significantly and you're caught in a down market when you need to renew, but there is significant benefit to going shorter term than longer.
And what you're implying here, and I don't know if you've got a slide here on pricing and so forth, there's a bit of a shortage, or maybe talk about the supply demand imbalance. You're expecting prices to go up, so why would you lock into a long-term contract now if prices are going to be materially higher in a few years? Is that the gist?
Yeah, exactly. So these are the supply demand charts, and bear in mind that with an industry that's dominated by private players principally, there's not a ton of public information available on pricing. Most of it comes up through negotiations that are covered by confidentiality agreements, but the public data that is available is presented here, and it shows what's been happening on the demand side, with demand really picking up and moving up at a faster rate than it ever has before, and that's driven by the emerging uses for helium, which we'll get into in just a second because it's something that has to get discussed. So you've got demand rising and production falling. And the reason production is falling is because helium has always been produced from conventional natural gas wells. Conventional natural gas does not include horizontal shale fracked gases. So the Marcellus Shale, all of these large natural gas fields that have revolutionized natural gas production in North America have been actually a hindrance on helium production, because there's no helium contained in those gas streams. So we've got supply coming offline, demand increasing, which is causing these price spikes that you see on the chart on the right, where helium was stable in the the $100 range for a number of years. It has jumped up now to the $300, $400, $500 US price per MCF. It is exceptionally high value gas, driven by scarcity, of course. So that's the world we've been living in for the last number of years. There was meant to be some easing of the supply demand imbalance, and there was during the COVID years where MRIs were not getting done as much. Elective treatments certainly were not getting done as much. But that's all reversed and it's moved back into supply shortage again. There was an article out in Gas World magazine, which is really the holy grail for inert gas publications, talking about helium shortage 4.0, which we're in now and is expected to last well into 2023. But the reason for the growth in demand, Dean, if you can go back to the next slide you were on, it all comes down to the uses of helium. And we've got two pie charts here, one showing North American demand with using US as a proxy, and one showing Asian demand using Japan as a proxy. And there are some pretty stark differences. Like over here on the North American side, you can see MRIs and healthcare account for at least 20% of annual demand for helium. If you look to Japan, it is 1% of helium demand. And that's not a function of no MRIs. There are more MRIs per capita in Japan than there are anywhere else in the world. It's simply a function of how much helium gets used in the manufacturing of high-tech products such as semiconductors, fiber optics, microchips, LCD screens. And those are the real growth areas that we're seeing. there's no projected slowdown in high-tech manufacturing that we can see anywhere on the horizon. And so the demand for helium continues to grow and grow in those specific segments. In North America,
a newer one is rocket engines.
yes, that as well. So whenever you see a rocket launch or a shuttle launch of any kind, helium is consumed in that process. So as that industry ramps up, more and more helium gets consumed. But on the North American side, what you're seeing is a bit of a shifting in the demand matrix where MRIs in healthcare are staying around 20%, but some of the other uses are dropping, and certainly lifting and balloons are dropping, and high-tech manufacturing is growing. In the last 2 years, 3 of the biggest consumers of helium in North America, well, in fact, the world, have been Amazon, Netflix, and Google, where they're using it to cool server farms, to service cloud computing and streaming. So that's really the demand push. The healthcare angle is always going to be there. There is certainly uses for helium in small nuclear reactors, so SMRs use helium as coolants, as does every military application in the world. Missile launches, submarines, anything that's nuclear powered consumes helium in the process. So it's a pretty interesting and diverse demand side of the scale. Absolutely, for sure. I mean, that's one of the reasons we got interested in it in the first place.
Yeah, and it's
So
definitely
it's probably worth just mentioning, kind of on the swing side, the supply side,
Yep.
as the U.S. production has dwindled near to zero. The big producers are Russia and Qatar.
Yep.
And so people do ask the question because their production is very large, entirely from natural gas production, of course, Gazprom, for example, that's huge natural gas production, but their helium percentage as a byproduct is something on the order of 0.03% or so. Nonetheless, very large. It's been delayed, and then I guess now with Russia is maybe even delayed further. But the point being is that the market that we're really after is kind of to be a Western world supply of helium. So more or less replacing this loss in US production, regardless of potential, which is still delayed, but potential production out of Russia and Qatar.
Yeah, it's a very valid point. Historically speaking, the US has been the largest helium producer. That is no longer the case. Saskatchewan is the leading jurisdiction in terms of places that could replace that supply. And
if I remember correctly, the U.S. actually has a strategic helium reserve, and like their strategic oil reserve. It's so vital, and I know got vast caverns, or I don't know what, somewhere where they keep it. And are they drawing out of that? Is that a potential, like they open the floodgates one day, or are they trying to collect more in there?
Well, that is in fact what's caused the spike that Dean's highlighting there, where the pricing just goes straight up. They shut down that distribution point of helium because they can't refill their caverns anymore. There's not enough helium production to keep that full. So the BLM storage cavern and the public helium auction is a thing of the past, no longer exists.
They've drained it. It's done. Or
it's no more public sales of helium coming out of their period.
Okay.
Yeah. So
they maintain a small reserve.
Those caverns, which they are auctioning off. Well, they're auctioning off. They have a closed bid process to buy it, but it's not enough to impact the market in any way, shape, or form. So,
right.
And again, that's all a function of legacy natural gas wells coming offline in the U.S.
Yeah.
So when that was announced, the last auction sale was in 2018 in August, and that's where you saw the first big price spike. And prices never come back down to that spike level since. Continues to rise. Anecdotally, the spot market on helium is about $1,000 an MCF. If you needed a canister today, that's what you're going to pay. So,
right.
Very high value. Dean, let's move forward.
Okay, where do we want to go next? We're getting pretty close to the end, other than
You know what? Yeah, actually, this is what I'd
We're
like
up
to ask.
to-
When do you guys actually, like the timeline, when should we see production? Or do you have any production right now? When do we see production? And do you have sort of a, obviously there's some, it's not guaranteed, some risk, but when do you expect if things fall into place as you expect, how would the world, how do you guys look at 6 months or 12 months from now?
Yeah, sure. Well, on the slide, you can see everything we've done to date, and then what's happening over the next, well, basically the rest of this year is the seismic program we announced last week, the reservoir engineering we announced last week at Climax. We're drilling another well at Climax in the spring, summer, of another production well there, targeting the conventional zones as opposed to the Nazarite. We're drilling a well at Val Marie, which will be an exploration and production well. And we have the ability to turn on as many as 4 of the existing wells that we've drilled to date. So we're looking into production probably second half of 2022.
Gotcha.
So in terms of announceable or newsworthy items that you'll see from us over the next 6 months will be an offtake agreement with a helium buyer, where they buy a set volume per year of helium at a set price. You'll see an announcement regarding our infrastructure plan for bringing a separator to site so we can refine our helium on site. Obviously, you'll see the results of all of our drilling, and you'll see the announcements on the Climax development. So pretty impactful stuff coming.
And a separator and all that technology, that's not new technology you guys have to develop. It's well established.
Yep.
There are lots of
Commercially
suppliers
available,
who provide this kind of tech.
Essentially off the shelf technology from
Yeah.
companies like Air Liquide. So there are delays in getting these things right now, as there is with everything in the world.
Yeah.
So it's a 3 to 6 month lead time between when you place the order to when the plant is operational at site.
Yeah.
So
In the oil and gas industry, they're always talking about payback periods. Do you guys talk in terms of that? Or
We do. So this is our slide on economics, and what you're looking at there in terms of the graph is a type curve. So this is an amalgamation of all the helium production wells that we had at the time in Saskatchewan over their useful life. You'll see they extend well beyond 10 years. The wells pay back in 6 months. So between the $1.5 million to drill it, to, well, 6 months after you have them on production, you've got your capital back, and the remaining 10 years are profit periods. So they're very impactful wells economically. And what you see is that the production is relatively smooth. I mean, the chart is choppy, but if you put a mean through it, it's relatively stable throughout the first 5 years before declines come in. And declines in oil and gas or helium wells are simply periods where the reservoir starts to deplete and production comes down. And so we see that in the tail end out through year 8, 9, 10, 11. So for us, 6 month payback is obviously very, very nice, especially given the fact that it's not like a Viking oil and gas well where you get your payback quickly, but production falls off a cliff after the 3rd month. This is stable production over a number of years.
I'm just doing some really rough math in my head, and let me know if I'm way off. If it $1.5 million per well, you get a 6 month payback, then they're cash flowing like $3 million a year thereafter.
Yep.
Okay.
You got it.
So for the first, which is the big difference, Martin, is that number is for the first, 5 or 6 or 7 years here is reasonably steady. And what Andy was trying to get to is a lot of people are looking at the horizontal shale boom that was largely in the States, where it may pay back in 6 months, but those wells, they drop in half within the first year, and then they drop in half again the next year. And so your curve spikes up like this, and then it comes way down like this, and it may last 10 years, but it's, a long tail of very small production.
And they also have to,
this is the opposite.
And they also had to do a lot of work to keep that going as well, put a lot of fracking and expenses to keep that long tail going as well.
Yeah, and important to note that this type well is a conventional well. It's an unstimulated well.
Mm-hmm.
So you're just sucking the straw and it keeps going.
You don't even suck on it. It comes at you on its own. There's no pumps needed here. There's no artificial lift. In fact, you generally have to slow the gas down because it wants to come up too quickly.
Yeah. So even these wells at the top, at the wellhead, they choke it back with the size of the valve at the top to most effectively drain the pool. Like if you let it go too fast, like too much flow, it could ruin the pool. So those reservoir engineers, they work it out exactly what size choke to use at the top end and all that kind of stuff. And as Andy says, this decline curve here is for a conventional well. So the Nazare at Climax will be quite different. We don't even know.
Okay.
But that's what we're working on over the course of the next few weeks, month or so on simulations, etc., from the reservoir engineers on Nazare.
Yeah.
We are about an hour into this. I think we've kind of hit the high notes here. I think we've gone pretty deep into this. We've got a bunch of questions from the audience. So I'm just going to read them out and we'll find out what the person says as I read it out here. You guys previously indicated that you would release independent established reserve for the Climax wells.
Yep.
What underpins the decision so far not to pursue these for the conventional zones, and will they be provided for the conventional and Nazare formations prior to the commencement of each?
So if
For sure.
I think if the question is talking about reserve reports like you'd see in oil and gas, we specifically cannot. We tried to and got our hands slapped a bit by the regulators because helium is not covered by the provisions of a 51101 report, which is a reserve report.
Okay.
So what we will report is things like estimated gas in place type numbers, and we've done that for the Nazare zone already. At 2.5 to 6 billion cubic feet of helium in place is the number that was put on it. But in terms of a formal 51101, we cannot do it until those regulations change, and we are pushing to get them changed to get helium included as a natural gas covered by those regs.
Okay, so the 5101 things, just helium's not part of that. You can't use that, and you can just say this company estimates we've got it at this or that, and that's as good as it gets.
You know, as silly as it sounds, Martin, we don't actually have any obligation to report any resource or reserve numbers.
Yeah.
Because helium is not covered by any regulation.
Okay.
You will see some companies that report using 51101 standards, but those are companies that are producing natural gas with helium.
Gotcha.
That's the difference. So
if you guys had natural gas in there, you could as sort of one of your byproducts, but you don't have it, so you can't say it.
Exactly right. Yeah.
All right. Good stuff. You've spoken a lot about producing in Q1 of 22 this year. However, given the delays, now you're talking about the second half of 2022, I guess, as you just said. Is that right?
That is right, and you know, a few things hit us that were unexpected in the late fall and early new year that set us back a ways, and it's unfortunate, but it was what it was. So we keep driving forward. We've had, you know, our initial facility with mobile facility designed for a while now, ready to pull the trigger on, but we got hit with a bad case of COVID outbreak at site. We got hit with a month of just atrociously bad weather where we couldn't put people on site to work. And that pushes us into the breakup period for completing all these things, and we can't work in that time frame, which pushes out another month, which is how we get into the second half. And it's unfortunate, but it's reality. And we just keep driving forward.
Right. it's another question similar to what you've just commented on, but they're asking also about flow rates. Can you make any comments regarding flow rates?
Same story, I guess. I mean, on the flow rates of the Nazare formation were not significant enough to report on their own, which is why we sort of anticipated that, which is why we're moving to the horizontal study. We've reported a couple of flow rates from the other wells. Climax 1, for example, flowed just under 2 million cubic feet a day. So we've got that. The Ogama wells will be announced once we're done there, which we're not yet. So those are yet to come out as well. But we will absolutely be reporting flow rates in their entirety when we have them.
Someone else is asking about flow rates and makes a comment that these flow rates look uneconomical. Is that the case?
Oh, well, again, we haven't really reported any flow rates from Nazare. So to that extent, when you report zero, I guess the answer is yes. But the long answer is we don't know what the long-term flow rates are going to be from the Nazare zone yet.
Okay. So yeah. There's still, yes. Okay. We know that wells will have a 6-month payback and are expected to yield 3 million per year for the first 5-6 years. Are we talking about 3 million in helium? Does that include other gases? Oh, I guess, do any of the other gases have value?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And the short answer is yes, they do. When you get to a certain scale. So say on an individual basis or a group of 5 wells basis, there's not going to be enough gas flow to justify capturing all of the nitrogen and condensing it and selling it.
Okay.
Given the capital cost. But once we get into our more permanent facilities built to service 20 plus wells, it is being designed to capture all of those other gases and monetize them all, whether it be nitrogen or CO2 or hydrogen, whatever they are. We're building out our long-term infrastructure to capture those and capture that inert gas market. Like nitrogen, for example, is the largest inert gas market in the world, far bigger than helium.
So that's 3 million a cash flow a year. That does not include the other gases as well. That would be on top. Once you get to that scale, there would be additional stuff. That's
helium alone.
Okay. Yeah. And I have no idea. Would the other gases, would that add 10%, 5%, 20% to your cash flows? Or
well, to be frank, we haven't even bothered modeling it yet because we're focused on helium now, and that's the answer. That's going to depend on whatever the final makeup of the gas that run through that facility is. So it's really
some wells don't even have carbon dioxide. Some do. It'll all depend on the actual makeup. And also, Martin, I think it's probably just to clarify. So the permanent facility that we went through in these pictures, it's the design that we've got is modular, so that it can start with membrane separation and PSA for the helium, and as it grows, we can add CO2 and or nitrogen onto it. And then also another module way further in the future, liquefaction. But also, just to be clear, just like North American Helium did in the past and currently doing now, using mobile membrane separation facilities while the permanent facility is being planned or built. And those are much quicker to build, readily available. You can either lease them or build them yourselves for, call it $5 million or something like that. So the initial production off the first wells that Andy was talking about would be processed by a mobile separation unit. So it kind of graduates to this permanent facility.
Regarding the government's action plan, which was formalized in November, there are grants. There are great grants repayable in royalty. Does RHC have access to those loans so far?
No loans. What we have access to is the grants. So that's our first application, as I mentioned, went in about a month ago into the grant program. So we submitted I believe it was around $10 million worth of expenditure that we think applies. And now we're in the back and forth stage with the program determining what they will accept versus what we applied for. We fully expect we'll get a large payback in the next 2 to 3 months, which we'll announce because it'll be material. So
Gotcha.
we don't have any loans or any debt or any plans for that at any time.
Gotcha.
In fact, the capital program they have for something like this, for example, and you know, it kind of runs through a formula, and there's a link on the government site that you can actually plug your numbers into, but you have to apply for them, of course. But for example, if this plant was $50 million, we would have to expend the $50 million. After it's expended and you've built this thing, the government would give you cash back to the tune of, let's say if it was 50 mil, I don't know, 18 million or 20 million, or it's not half, it's not a quarter, it's somewhere in between, like 30-40% or something. They would actually give you money back.
Another question here on like lead time between commencing a drill well and commercial production. You've already sort of talked about commercial production in the second half of the year, correct?
Yep.
Okay. And when would revenues and cash flow be? Is it going to take a while to build up enough of tanks before you can sell it off and so forth, or?
No, not really. So what happens with these plants is a trailer of compressed tubes actually come to the site and hooks up to your plant, and it gets filled.
Yeah.
Once it gets filled, it's driven away, and you can actually see, Dean, in your bottom image on the screen there, you can see a couple of those cigar tube trailers in the bottom right corner. So those actually drive to site and plug in. So a month, basically. By the time you're operational and you're running gas through a facility, you're a month away from cash.
Okay. There's a question here on, do you need to raise capital in 2022? And I guess just, can you talk about your cash flow, your cash usage, and your balance sheet?
Yep. So no debt, as I mentioned. We have a little over $5 million of cash net of our current exploration program. So that includes the seismic and all of that. That's already dealt with. So we've got enough to get through all of that, to drill a couple of wells and have a few $1 million left at the end. The results of those wells are going to dictate how quickly we move to that next step. We're looking for a critical mass of production to run through a temporary facility. So we've got, as I mentioned, we've got 6 wells, but really we've got 4 wells and 2 wells because they're such a distance apart from one another. They're not going to produce into the same facility.
Okay. So you're, with what you've budgeted so far, is that going to get you to production and cash flow, or do you need to raise additional capital to get sort of?
No, it should get us there. Absolutely. The only wild card there will be the timing on purchasing the facility itself.
Yeah.
To that end, when it comes to buying infrastructure, there are other programs available to help with that purchase, whether it be, you know, a lease rental program from Air Liquide or whomever, or even acquiring some sort of loan facility to bring it online. So we have sufficient capital to do everything we need to do.
Do you see the Saskatchewan government setting up a liquefaction plant that could be used by all of Saskatchewan, or just a general toll processor, so those guys don't have so much control?
Yeah, there's certainly talk of that. In a perfect world for the government of Saskatchewan, they would like us to get together with North American Helium and some other companies and jointly build one. And I think ideally they would like to find a helium hub city, whether that be, you know, Swift Current or Weyburn or wherever, where a liquefier could be built to service every company.
It would just be a big toll processor that everyone could access.
Yeah, I think they would like to do that. I'm not sure that all the companies want to do that. I think there's a pretty strong argument to privately run facilities. And I mean, North American Helium is going to be to the scale to justify a liquefaction facility in relatively short order. And that gives them the ability to toll process. And frankly, we could be there within 18 months. And
Yeah.
we could have the ability to toll process. So I think there's going to be at least one. I think it's likely going to be based in the southwest corner of the province, whether that be the Swift Current area or somewhere further southwest. But and the government will likely own a piece of it, or certainly fund a piece of it through their incentive program.
Gotcha. And timing on the offtake agreement, that do you need to get into production first so people are confident that you can do it, or sort of contingent? We've got an offtake agreement once we start producing.
Yeah, so we're in all those discussions now, and that'll be announced before we go into production. And what those agreements will do is specify sort of minimum, maximum rates of delivery and pricing. So that's another big step that people are waiting to see. That combined with flow rates and offtake and processing facilities plans are sort of the next big factors in our story.
Gotcha. You mentioned you could turn 4 wells on right now, so why haven't you put them into production?
One, we don't have an offtake agreement in place. 2, we don't have a production facility in place, and yeah, that's really 2. There's 2 reasons. There they are.
Yeah. All right. And all the well. Yeah, some more questions about funding, which I think we've ticked off here. Regulations and lack thereof. Would there be value in providing investors and analysts with estimates of gas in place and well or reserve detailed, signed by engineers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll need that. We'll need that anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So to do an offtake, I guess you'd need to sort of have some engineering thoughts on how much you have there.
Yes, it would certainly help. I don't think we're going to need one for our first offtake agreement because it's going to start relatively small. When you get into something the size of building a permanent facility like North American's done there, that's where you need those reports to sort of justify the capital cost of building it.
Yeah. So is there are you planning on putting out an engineering report with helium reserve estimates, and would that be like a H2 kind of thing, or?
Yeah, I mean, we have our internal estimates, which were done by an engineer, of course.
Yeah.
Getting an outside stamp on it is a little tricky for the reasons I mentioned before, but we certainly can and have looked at it, and frankly, John Stiles would likely be the one to do it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Timing on when the horizontal Climax wells will be drilled?
Well, it's going to take at least until the end of April and probably middle to end May before we're done our simulation process on it to determine what the most appropriate drill design is.
Yeah.
Clearly, we're not going to be drilling until after that happens. I would say best case scenario, fall of 2022.
Gotcha. The previous plan was to have the wholesalers provide their own mobile purification unit with an offtake. Has that plan changed, or was that the original plan? And has that plan changed, and how come?
No, that plan is still there, but I would say that it's evolved to include something different, mainly because we're seeing a lot of more interest from smaller off-takers on terms that are fundamentally better for us. And it's worth noting that companies like Air Products or whomever, they operate in various different silos. So the technology arm, which has the facilities technology, is completely separate from the gas buying division. So we're not required to enter into an offtake agreement with Air Products in order to get access to an Air Products facility. Totally separate things. So
yeah.
So I don't know if you said this already or not, Andy. This North American helium plant at Battle Creek, this was Air Liquide designed facility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your offtake potential guys, are they one of the top 6 gas companies, or could it be like, I don't know, an MRI company says, yeah, we'll do an offtake, or what could an offtake partner kind of look like? Is it one of the top 6, or is it some unknown type person?
No, it's generally one of the larger industrial gas wholesalers. So
Gotcha. So you get
yeah.
to play them off against each other, see who's most interested, and
Yep.
find the. So there is a market there, not overly deep, but there is you got 6 guys to negotiate with.
Yeah, and those are the principal ones, but there are others. So if you look at the liquefaction facility on screen, that is owned by one private company, and they actively look to buy gas to run through their facility. So they are a potential offtaker.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there are a
to
bunch
look
of,
at it a different way, Martin, sort of similar to oil and gas-ish in terminology anyway, you know, there could be smaller than those big, huge companies, midstream type of companies that would be interested in working with the company and combination with offtake as well. That type of thing is very possible, and they're out there, and we're talking to them. So
I think there are a few more questions here, but they're basically circling back on the items we've hit upon. We're well over, almost hitting an hour and a half here. So lots of time from the audience. Thanks everyone for sticking around. You guys, thanks for making the time for me and the audience. We should wrap it up here. Any final, final words here to put a bow on it, so to speak?
Well, I think, you know, we've had a very, very busy year in Royal. You know, 13 months ago, we just spud our very first well. Now we're 6 in. You know, by far the most active exploration company in the public realm anyway, on the helium side. We're learning a lot as we go, and we're getting very, very close to seeing all these plans come to fruition. We've got some pretty big announcements coming up in the next quarter that are really going to define the future of this company. And I would encourage anyone who has any interest whatsoever in the helium space to pay close attention to what the various companies are doing, pay attention to what we're doing. We take our job very, very seriously. We spend all of our money on exploration and engineering, and we think it's going to pay dividends for us in the real near term. We still believe we'll be the first helium company into production out of the junior explorers, and we think that's this year.
All right.
well, thanks, Martin. All I'd like to say is, well, thank you very much, and for this first interview. And I guess I would suggest, alluding to what Andy just said, you know, this is after a year and a bit, kind of where the rubber hits the road here. So, you know, the upcoming weeks and months. So, you know, look forward to being able to talk to you again and updating you with these, you know, fairly critical milestones that we're kind of hitting upon here in short order.
Yeah, it sounds like the next few months are going to be pretty interesting. A lot of news flow coming up here. So I'll be watching, seeing how things go on. And with that, let's wrap it up. Thank you very much for joining us. And we'll be watching and looking forward to having a conversation in a couple of months from now.
Great. Thanks for your time. And if anyone has any further questions, they can reach out to Dean or I at any time.
That's great. Cheers. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.